Literature in the 1920s Harlem Renaissance included themes of Black identity, African American experience, emergence of the memories of slavery, and institutional racism. All of these are due to the northern migration of African Americans and their need to establish themselves in a new northern life. Literature focused on several different styles: poetry, short stories, novels, and included what is often called Black or rural dialect. Ideas of social liberation expanded, and literature reflected this movement for change. We have a lot of books here. The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot. We have The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. And we have Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Hurston. This is a good one. We have this book as well. The New Negro by Elaine Locke. This book, it's incredible. It shares a hopeful look at Black life in America. It's the philosophical core of the Harlem Renaissance. It speaks to the people, telling them that they have to take a stand, and if that stand involves violence, then so be it. The New Negro is the heart of the African American movement for the disposal of racism in America. It gave African Americans the motivation to turn their fellow artists' dreams of independence, freedom, and justice into a reality, and develop the identity of African Americans in America. What a good book. And we have plenty more. Feel free to look around.
The technologically advanced violence of the Great War in the 1910s brought a newly risen popularity in existentialism and satire. The atrocities brought on by the war were deemed by many to be pointless and have no end. Art movements like Dadaism developed in response to these atrocities, presenting nonsensical and often satirical images that provided as a mirror to the absurd horror that characterized World War I. Other movements such as Cubism and Art Deco leaned away from accurate portrayals of reality as well. Visual art began to shift into something more abstract and decorative, a far cry from the realistic detail of Romanticism and the soft swirls of Impressionism. Visual art became bolder, and skirts became shorter.
With silken legs and scarlet lips, we're young and hungry, wild and free. James Lava wrote that one, and I think that it describes us modern women pretty well. With the war, there have been a lot of changes. Women have been thrown out of their home lives and into the workforce, and now we can vote. With these progressive changes, our fashion has changed as well. We've ditched the corsets and the long skirts. After all, how could we ever dance in those? Our fashion choices now are bold and freeing. Now, while my outfit may not be the most flashy, it does show some important staples in a woman's outfit today, which would be kitten heels, a boxy dress with a drop waist, and my personal favorite, dangly pearl beads. I personally draw inspiration for my jewelry from the most inspirational Coco Chanel. She's one of the most influential fashion designers of our time. She was the one that helped us ditch those pesky corsets. And of course, Josephine Baker is a very important icon as well. Did you know that she was the first Black female to perform on Broadway? And her outfits are always so glamorous. She shows way less skin than any woman would dare to show 10 years ago, yet she still manages to make it so elegant. And Gerda Wegner, while not quite as well known as Coco Chanel, her and her husband Einar are just as reputable as artists. Although I suppose I shouldn't call Einar Einar anymore, because Einar actually prefers to be called Lily and identifies as a woman. That's the first I've ever heard of that happening before. Lily even models for Gerda, and it shows off some of Gerda's designs. I consider all of these women to be pioneers in fashion. Because of them, I can dance without anything holding me back. So what are you waiting for? Get yourself some kitten heels and a flashy dress to match.
The domestic social problems of the 1920s were influenced greatly by the need to explore and to challenge authority. This need to challenge authority stemmed from World War I, or the Great War, where both African American and white Americans went overseas and saw what was actually out in the world, and also saw the pain and destruction that was wrought by World War I. Once they came home, they chose to look inside of themselves and question what it meant to be a person or even to be human. These ideas could be greatly seen in both the literature and art that went throughout all of the 1920s, but it also helped influence a lot of the social problems and protests of the time. With the government installing prohibition in the early 1920s, people saw the government as this huge overarching figure, trying to keep them simply from having a good time. However, because prohibition was repealed in the late 1920s, people saw that if you spoke out or protested against the government, then you could in turn change the course of history. Because of prohibition and different movements like that, people generations down the line saw the 1920s as a spark moment where people could see themselves as individuals who could speak out against government or social authority and instead speak out for what they thought were injustices of the time. Without the 1920s, we wouldn't have a lot of social or domestic protests that we see today, and the 1920s were the spark point for a lot of social outrage later on.
We need your support, thank you. We need your support.
The 1920s held many big names in swing, most of them getting their start in the Fletcher Henderson Orchestra, including Louis Armstrong, Lester Young, and Coleman Hawkins. Other big names in the East included Duke Ellington, Jack Teagarden, and Glenn Miller, and out in Kansas City, there was Count Basie and Benny Moten.
The amazing thing about the jazz music that came out in the 1920s is the profound impact that it's had on us, even in the 21st century where we are now. So, one thing is notation in music. They had to invent a whole new notation for jazz music because the original way to get that swing feel, that da 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 da, it took a lot of extra ink on the paper in order to notate it, so a player knew to play it, especially when it was new. So they created a new type of notation called jazz notation, which helps to mitigate that impact of needing a lot of extra ink. As well, the amazing things, these artists that you've heard, they have influenced modern music in so many more ways than you could even ever think about. Your modern rap music, your modern rock music, all has been influenced by these heavy bluesy artists like Miles Davis, who are influenced by these 1920s artists. The fact of the matter is, whether you're listening to Slayer or Kendrick Lamar, you are hearing somewhere in there the subtle impact of the 1920s jazz music.
He's the man that made me get out of both my dance.